Hello everyone, welcome to the start of a pretty incredible week, with the war in Iran over on the other side of the world, and the United States and Israel very actively involved. A lot of things happening. We're going to touch on that very briefly with the first episode of the podcast this week, go over a geopolitical brief in which we look at the events from a biblical lens. And what I mean by that is a rational lens. We're looking at trying to understand what's happening. We're not trying to pin this to any specific biblical prophecies. After that, we're going to have a couple episodes, maybe 2, maybe 3 episodes in which we introduce you all to Audrey, our project research assistant, so that you all can get to know her, another member of our team. Hope you enjoy it. Today is March the 3rd. 2026, we are into day 3 of a war between the United States, Israel, and Iran. There's a lot of things that are happening out there. There's been a lot of talk, and of course, there's the political talk behind it. You know, the pro-Trump people are generally, Trump is doing everything that's right. The anti-Trump people are, Trump is doing terrible. He's starting World War III, or it's just going to be a disaster and the world's going to end. So we're seeing all those things. I thought I'd kind of focus just real quickly on just what exactly is happening. As a review, we saw that the strikes started on Sunday, and Ayatollah Khamenei, who was the replacement 37 years ago to Ayatollah Khomeini, was killed in an airstrike, or in a missile strike. Now, that was an Israeli missile strike. It was not a U.S. missile strike, from what I've read, which is in particular interesting because even though it was an Israeli missile strike, most of the narratives, or most of the reporting that I've seen in the mainstream have presented it as if Trump killed Khamenei. Now, that's the way the world is going to perceive it. And that is the way the American adversaries will perceive it. That's the way China is perceiving it. China, even, I think their foreign minister announced that. I received an email from a friend asking if he thought that that taking Maduro in January and then taking out Khamenei in the last couple of days was a message to Putin and Xi. And my response was, no, I don't believe it is, because these are all very different. Maduro Venezuela and Iran are middle powers, and Maduro was indicted by American courts for criminal activity. Khamenei was a known state sponsor of terror. China is not a state sponsor of terror. And Russia, while Russia is, they don't really sponsor terrorism per se. I mean, I guess there's some people that think they do. They're sponsoring sabotage attacks throughout Europe. It is just very different. And I think the real difference is the ability of those countries to escalate significantly as a result of what happened. Taking Maduro changes the entire political setup over in Venezuela. Now the political setup, even though they're not democratic, but they are willing to align more oriented toward the United States and away from China because of what has happened. In Venezuela, and George Friedman had a tremendous interview about this. It's on YouTube. George Friedman is the head of the firm called Geopolitical Futures, and he goes into quite a bit of very sound reasoning about what he believes the Trump administration's rationale is behind taking out Khamenei. And it goes down to Iran being a state sponsor of terrorism for multiple decades, and their insistence on pursuing the nuclear program, which everyone believes is very likely to get to where they would have a nuclear weapon. So then the big comparison is, well, what about North Korea? They're a middle power, and they're bad, and they got a nuclear weapon. Well, what's the difference? Well, North Korea is the hermit kingdom. They're internally focused. They're not trying to export their ideology and spread terrorism throughout the world. Everything they do is geared toward protecting the regime. And so their acquisition of nuclear weapons was intended as a deterrent to prevent the United States from ever attacking them. And at some level, as a deterrent to China as well. Because even though China is on their side, historically, the Korean Peninsula was one of the areas where the Chinese Empire in its periphery would seek to control, if not indirectly, directly, and might launch an invasion force. So having nuclear weapons also protects them from the potential control that the People's Republic of China might try to exert on them. Iran, however, has consistently tried to export their ideology, to spread it within the Muslim world, to generate sympathy for the Shia belief system within Islam, and to wield their influence by means of terror, by means of activities, and by means of control in order to reshape the region in their image. And one of the ideologies that they hold, two of the ideologies that they hold, that they have even since the Iranian Revolution, since Khomeini, the original Ayatollah, has been that America is the great Satan, the great evil that threatens the entire world, and that Israel is the lesser Satan. And so they want to destroy both. And while they were nowhere close to getting to a point where they could launch a ballistic missile at the United States, that's something that they fully intended to do. And even if they didn't, their hatred for Israel came out very strong, and multiple administrations would, say things like they wanted Israel to be wiped off the map. In fact, the former Iranian president, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, was the one that really popularized that phrase, that Israel needed to be wiped off the map. He was also killed in an airstrike in the last few days, even though he's retired. He was out of the public sphere. But the Israel, because the Mossad has a habit of going after anyone that has been strongly anti-Semitic publicly and has promoted state sponsorship of terrorism. So I believe that really is the rationale, is do everything, the rationale of the U.S. government, the U.S. administration has been do everything possible to prevent Iran from ever being able to get a nuclear weapon. And this was a real step in that direction. Now, after the 12-day war, which happened last June, the United States had bombed some of the reprocessing facilities, had the deep bunker buster bombs that had taken out a significant amount of Iran's ability to further their nuclear weapons agenda. But there was a lot of refined uranium that was unaccounted for in the aftermath of that. And there's no way to get it. And Iran had consistently blocked efforts to prevent the International Atomic Agency from fully monitoring their nuclear weapons pursuits. They would turn off the monitors at certain times and things like that. So they did not give the international community ever any good reason for them to be trusted in their pursuit of nuclear weapons. So, what does that mean? Well, it means that the United States just felt like this was the time. This was a window. This was the time. Israel had intelligence, and there had been tensions ramping up, and Iran was not backing down. So that's what I think was going on. Now, what I see happening, I'm just looking at some of the headlines. I'll just read them off my news stream. Israel, this is Wall Street Journal, says Israel strikes Tehran, Beirut in widening conflict with Iran. The idea of Beirut, that's Lebanon. That's where Hezbollah, Iran's proxy, just north of Israel, lives. They had launched some missiles on Israel. Israel's been looking for an excuse to go in and kind of finish the job from what they were not able to, had not yet been able to finish last year. In New York Times headline, front page, U.S. closes 2 Gulf embassies, Israel seizes sites in Lebanon. Bloomberg headline, market turmoil deepens as Iran conflict threatens energy supplies. This one's very interesting in particular because in looking at the markets, one of the things, there's 3 indicators that kind of tell you what international markets are thinking. They kind of give a picture of where things might go. And they are the price of oil, the price of gold, and the price of silver. And with the price of oil, it has to do with the spread between Brent and West Texas Intermediate crude. Those prices. The prices of oil has been going up. Now, what that means is the price of oil is indicating that market participants, and the markets, these are worldwide markets. They're not just stock investors in the United States. These are people from all over the world, every country in the world that has access to international futures markets. What that means is that markets are anticipating that because of all the drone strikes and the missile strikes on refineries and the closures of the Strait of Hormuz, that there is going to be an extended supply disruption in the price of oil. Okay. Now, in popular media, what that usually looks like is they say that means there's going to be inflation. But what it really ends up causing, it'll cause short-term inflation, but then that results in long-term deflation. And what I mean by deflation, for people that don't know what deflation is when price of goods and services drop dramatically, not because things are equalizing out, but because people people just can't afford to buy them no matter what the prices they are. So economic activity stops. That's what a recession is, or a depression. So that's what spikes in oil tend to do. Now, that doesn't mean we're going into a depression or even a recession. It just means that if the price of oil stays high for an extended period, economic activity worldwide will slow because it will raise the price of energy to produce things. Now, it could mean we go into a recession. It just doesn't guarantee it. What the price of gold has been doing, interestingly enough, price of gold has been going down. Now, what that is indicating is that the market thinks that the war is going to end fairly quickly. Hostilities are going to cease fairly quickly, rather than this becoming a long, drawn-out thing. And the reason why it means that is because when the price of gold drops on the other side of the beginning of a conflict, it means that market participants see that the end of the conflict is probably just around the corner, or the end of the acute period of the conflict, and so there's no more need for a safe haven. Gold is trading as a safe haven asset. There's no more need for a safe haven, so that the market thinks, based on that indication, that the primary set of hostilities are going to end fairly soon. But at the same time, putting oil and gold together, what it looks like is the market overall thinks that there's going to be some kind of second run at a set of bombings, or some kind of next set of escalations, because the price of oil is going up. That means it's not only long-term supply disruptions, but a next set of escalations. It's going to help cause that long supply disruption, and then once that happens, then things will settle down. Now, silver, where the price of silver comes in, silver is both looking at it as an industrial metal and a monetary metal. And so with silver falling down, silver going down, that means that the market is pricing long-term on the industrial side that economic activity is going to slow down. And in particular, probably China, because the price of oil is going to go up for China because they import 40% of their oil from through the Strait of Hormuz. And so that's going to raise production costs for things that China produces using silver, which means they're not going to be able to produce as much. They're going to slow down their production of solar panels and batteries and all those other things. So the demand for silver is going to go down. And then the other side of the silver trade is the monetary side of silver, which is correlated to gold. So the market thinks that gold is not as necessary in the short term, and so the market is pricing that gold is going. Now, I don't believe that gold is going down for an extended period, but it's just pulling back up off the recent headline high levels that it's been. And silver is doing the same thing. So silver is pulling back also, and as a result of that, so silver is hitting negative, is getting negative pressure from both ends. Okay, so that's what it looks like, and so all of that is to say that that's what the market indicates, and the market tends to be generally on the right track. Now, next headline in The Economist says the Iran war is rapidly engulfing the region. Reading that. Headline in the Financial Times says stocks and bonds tumble as widening Middle East war rattles markets. Okay. Another indication is in the global bond market. Bond yields have gone up, which means that people have been selling bonds. Now, the reason for that is usually people buy bonds if they're afraid of an economic disruption. But if one of the things that's happened is, the driving factor is that the potential crisis impact of this and the rising of the oil price means that market participants are looking to, they need dollars being the world's reserve currency. And even though there's a lot of narratives out there that the dollar is losing its reserve currency status, the market seems to indicate that people are still looking for dollars. They're still looking to trade with dollars. And so the dollar goes up. People need dollars. And so what they do is they sell the first thing they can in order to get the cash. And the first thing that they can sell are bonds, U.S. government bonds in particular. That causes the interest rates on U.S. government bonds to go up when U.S. government bonds are sold off. So why all that matters, of course, is it all has to do with where things are going economically in the world and whether or not we're moving toward a condition where things could get so bad that it destabilizes the entire world. Now, we don't know. It doesn't look like it's gotten that bad yet. It just looks like we're in a crisis phase that's a correction, but it could, because that really will ultimately depend, I think, on how big the impact will end up being on the price of oil. Another news, the other thing that came out is there was a U.S. State Department advisory that came out yesterday advising all American personnel in the Middle East region to leave. That's very significant, because usually the U.S. State Department doesn't issue a widespread warning like that, listing several countries if they don't believe that there's a problem. But there was one thing that was kind of interesting about that, in that the warning did not follow the normal pattern of the way the State Department normally issues warnings. It was first posted on their WhatsApp channel. But it has now made news headlines. It was on Bloomberg's website as well. So those are the things that we're seeing, and of course there is always a concern that this will sponsor people that are sentimental toward Iran. We do not see that other Middle Eastern countries are aligning themselves with Iran. In fact, most of the other Middle Eastern countries are all really mad at Iran because Iran fired missiles at them in response to American and Israeli strikes. Now, the reason why they're upset about that is because, like the UAE, Saudi Arabia, all these other countries had been in Jordan, they'd all been in a condition in which they had said, they had told the United States, even though you have troops, you have bases on our soil, we do not want you to use those bases to strike Iran. And they made that public. And Iran has chosen, regardless, to strike the other Middle Eastern countries, hoping, I believe, their intent is to spark widespread anti-American backlash. But there's a chance that the backlash will erupt back on against them, because the countries are all angry at Iran. They see that the Shia Muslims don't care about their Sunni Muslim brothers. They just have this political agenda to push the anti-Israel, anti-American agenda. So that's kind of my quick summary. Do you all have any comments on that?
I have a few, but just some thoughts, observations. I believe today Fatwa 2s were launched for the first time, so that'll be interesting to see how that plays out, their hypersonic missiles. A few thoughts that came to my mind regarding Venezuela and Iran is that both of them have been resource allies to China. Resource allies, and also allies in other ways to Russia too. So my thoughts, and this is just all it is. It's just it's not even speculation. It's more like questions. How is this going to impact BRICS in the long term? Especially because Russia and China, for the most part, seem to be hands-off regarding Iran. Though Iran was not a founding member of BRICS, it still played an important role as a resource ally. Something else that comes to mind too is the importance of geographic importance of Iran. It's a big country. I've never been there, but just taking a look at it, from a physical geography approach, it's huge. I mean, it spans from the Arabian Sea, its gateway to the Indian Ocean, all the way up to the Caspian, and it touches Pakistan and Afghanistan. It touches Turkmenistan to the north, Azerbaijan, Armenia. It is like an anchor, a regional anchor that bridges what we would conventionally consider the Middle East with more Central Asia, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and all the other stands in the Caucasus area. So it has a geographical importance. I mean, it's a big nation. Then the other thought that came to mind is, how is China going to be monitoring all this? No doubt they're going to be looking at lessons learned, because if there's anything conflict the last 5 years has shown, actually longer than that, 8 years has shown, is that we have moved into a drone warfare. We have moved into missile warfare. It gets ugly, even more ugly, of course, when all of a sudden you put troops on the ground the way that Russia did. But Russia's situation is troops on the ground plus drone plus missiles. At this point, we're seeing primarily airstrikes and missiles on both sides, both ways. So it adds a very different dimension to the conventional warfare that we know, or that we are at least used to seeing before COVID. For the most part, of course, we had the Azerbaijan war before that, which did have drone strikes, but it's like we've kind of entering a different phase. It's almost like when you're watching the videos, it's like watching fireworks shows, in a sense. It's like, ooh, look at the pretty colors, and yet you realize, oh, it's not pretty. This is death and destruction raining down. So those are just some initial thoughts. How is this going to impact BRIC in the long term? How is China going to learn from the lessons? Because no doubt they're analyzing all of this. And then you made a really important point about the fact that the Sunni and the Shiites, they're not holding hands. But what will the long-term implications look like if this thing gets drawn out for a protracted period of time? And all bets are it's not going to, but at the same time, it's like, war has an interesting way of sometimes taking different turns. I think Russia was looking to take Ukraine, like over the weekend kind of thing, and just like COVID, 15 days to flatten the curve. There's a tendency for things to spiral, and I guess that's always the risk that's in play.
Yeah, it really is. Thinking a little bit about China, there was a video that was on First Post. First Post is one of the news sources that I follow. It's a India-based news source, and it's Paki Sharma is the name of the anchor there. She's a very articulate news host there, and it's video. I only watch the video. I don't read any of their print. I don't even know if they have print. But she had this video on the Chinese air defense missiles that were sold to Iran, and there was a similar set of Chinese air defense systems that had been sold to Venezuela. Two cases in which American technology very quickly overcame the Chinese air defenses. Now, what I would be especially hoping that people pay attention to is that doesn't mean that the Chinese technology doesn't work. It could entirely have to do with the operators and how they've, because their systems are not well integrated and things like that. So would hope that wouldn't give American planners a false sense of confidence and think, oh, it doesn't, Chinese weapons have proven themselves ineffective, and and as they plan defensive arrangements in a potential conflict with China, which we hope never happens,
Right.
that they would just keep in mind, just because it didn't work in Venezuela and Iran doesn't mean the Chinese will not be able to use their own systems. The other thing to consider, and I wrote about this in my essay just the other day, is that rapid depletion, rapid expenditure of American missile technology, all of which is dependent on materials that are sourced from China. Okay? So it happened in the 12-day war back in June, and it's happening again now. There was an article yesterday in the Wall Street Journal about that, specifically about how our weapons stockpile is depleted because we're having to fire so many. Now, they say that Iran potentially has somewhere between 80,000 to 100,000 Shahed drones.
Wow.
Now, these drones, they're slow flying. I mean, there's a chance that, forces could figure out how to just shoot them down with machine guns or something like that, or the old style anti-aircraft type weapons. But of course, you start putting a ton of lead out in the air, then that presents the possibility of, problems with civilian casualties as those bullets come falling back down. In any war where you're firing anything up into the air, there's danger for people that are on the ground to get hit. But they can't do anything about that other than tell people to shelter in place and hope that their roofs are strong enough to block projectiles from coming through. So, with all that and the necessity of being able to get the necessity of needing to be able to get that those materials sourced again, I think there's some danger there for long-term danger for the American arsenal. Okay. So
I have one quick question. Then I'm going to throw it out to Audrey.
Yeah.
Audrey and I monitored the World Economic Forum back in 2020, 2021. We did it both together, monitoring it in real time, and I haven't been able to monitor it the way Audrey has now in the last little while. And I know, Audrey, recalling those 2 years where you and I monitor it together, the real focus seemed to be on China as being like, that's the shining light. This is World Economic Forum, we're like lockstep with China. It relates, I guess, in a way because of the fact that Iran and China have been partners or allies, especially resource allies. From the last time that you've monitored the World Economic Forum, which was just recently, had that shifted at all? Was it China, 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 the way it was in earlier ones, or was that kind of more subdued?
It was more subdued this time. It was actually more focused on just, the worldview shift. How Trump has, forced a worldview shift. How Carney is partnering with China. I think that's important. But it wasn't that huge push like when we were monitoring a few years ago. They even openly said from their mouths that China was the new superpower, that America wasn't.
Right.
Oh.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. That's very telling, isn't it? That's kind of interesting.
It is.
It is very interesting. And if you look at that in light of what Xi Jinping has done in the last few months with changing the whole security apparatus, purging people in the military. In fact, just last week, right now China has just opened up the National People's Congress, a 2-week meeting where they're going to be setting the economic agenda for the next 5 years. And just last week, China purged 9 people from the Chinese military establishment. Let's see if I can find the article here. Really interesting, because this was, let's see. It should come up here. Yeah. It says, China ousts, the article in Bloomberg says, China ousts 9 military lawmakers as Xi's purge widens. China removed 9 military lawmakers from its national parliament in the latest sign that President Xi Jinping's purge of key defense establishment personnel continues to widen. So he is looking to get control. So if you think about what you said, Audrey, how the emphasis at the World Economic Forum is far more on the change in the worldview. They're de-emphasizing China, and China goes through these cycles. We saw it actually, I think in the historically, 400 years ago, China pulled back from the attempt to really, actually it's more like 700 years ago, I think, pulled back from this attempt to really become a global power when they had sent their navy around the world to trade and everything, and then they got a new emperor, and they pulled back and tried to secure what was going on within China. Now, I don't think China is going to do that this time, fully, but there is this sense of China pulling back to make China more internally secure. The United States is kind of doing that too. The United States, with its focus being pulled back on the Western Hemisphere. And actually, when I look at what the U.S. is doing right now in the war with Iran, I see this as a step towards making it easier for the United States to pull out of the Middle East. That's what I think is one of the long-term goals. Why Trump is willing to justify this particular war is because if this is solved, if Iran is no longer a problem in the Middle East, and Israel becomes one of the main power brokers to keep the balance, to prevent Islamist extremism from taking hold, and certainly from the Shia perspective, run by Islam, then the United States won't have any more reason to be in there.
Yeah, and that makes a question then the role of Turkey, being a NATO member, being on the border of Iran as well, and boy, there's lots of big plays that potentially could come out of this.
Yep, there really, really are. So, well, I don't want to extend our geopolitical brief too very much longer. Does anyone else have any ideas? I would just say to people that are watching or listening, we just encourage everybody to open up discussions with us, with each other. We don't pretend that we have all the answers by any means. So, open up discussions. We would love to have your feedback. And sorry, we didn't even introduce Audrey at the beginning of this podcast because we're going to do that in our next recording. So we will do that. And so I'll go on and stop it here. And it will start on our next plan, okay? Okay, thank you all for listening. That's the end of our geopolitical brief for today. In our next few episodes, we're going to introduce you all to Audrey, our project research assistant. So stay tuned. Hope you enjoy what we're doing here. Thank you.